The celestial mandala of service accompanies you to discover the seventh constellation of the wheel of the zodiac that we consider Libra, and which is associated with the field of service, justice in the new era. Welcome to this seventh episode of this cycle of podcasts dedicated to human service fields. And this month, in the sign of Libra, we'll be focusing on the field of justice as human service, but also as an expression of our true nature. My name is Lorraine Flower, and I'm a member of the community of Living Ethics. And today I'll be your host for this podcast. In the new era, we could argue that justice will be upheld by laws formulated as a reflection of spiritual laws and principles, aimed at the development of consciousness through right relationships at all levels. Libra, the balanced scales, which has always been a symbol of justice, is a constellation that marks an important moment in the cycle of the year, that of the autumn equinox. The etymological origin of the word equinox refers, in fact, to the concept of equality, of harmonic balance between two or more parts that appear in contrast to each other to symbolize, on the level of consciousness, the ability to hold together and recompose duality at a higher point of synthesis. Libra's esoteric motto reads, "I choose the path that passes between two great lines of force." In particular, Libra expresses the experience of a balanced existence between the aspiration of the soul and the desire for the personality. Libra is also called the place of judgment, as the aspirant focuses on the life of the soul for which he yearns, but always identifies obstacles within himself that make him swing upwards in a spiritual sense, or downwards towards more material matters. Libra is also the guarantor of the law, which must protect justice in a positive way, and not just be an instrument of coercion or repression. In helping us discriminate between what is right and what is not, Libra creates the balance between spiritual laws and human laws, thus generating new models of manifestation of the evolutionary plan. I'd like to welcome our guest today, who's going to help us to explore more of this understanding of justice. And today we're joined by Mayte Gomez. Mayte is a psychosynthesis psychotherapist who trained in England. She serves currently as one of the focalisers of Sundial House, and in particular, the 3-year training in creative meditation. She's a student of the wisdom teachings and also teaches yoga, meditation, and yoga nidra. She's a Spanish Canadian who lives in Canada and in England, who has lived in Canada and in England, but now lives in Spain. So welcome, Mayte. You're very welcome to our program today.
Thank you, Lorraine. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Fabulous. Well, we're very happy to have you and very, very honored to have you. So we're exploring this whole subject of justice. And as we reflect together to imagine a future where justice can be expressed in the laws, in accordance with the laws and principles in a more evident way, there may be some of our listeners who are thinking, well, what are these laws and principles that we're referring to? And what have they got to do with justice? So maybe you'd be willing to get us started with just a bit of a better understanding of those spiritual laws and principles and how they may be influencing our attitudes to justice even now, today.
Okay. Well, let me begin when you invited me to reflect with you on the issue of justice. I looked up the word because, when we look for the etymological background of the word, that's a trigger for reflection, isn't it? So when I read the definition coming from Middle English and the Old French, justice, the definition was that justice is the quality of being fair and just, It is moral soundness and conformity to truth. And what really struck me about, or from this definition, was this piece, conformity to truth. And I thought, this is going to be so difficult. It is so difficult for us, for human beings, to conform to truth, because what is truth? On the human plane, we are ruled by the law of polarity, and that means we go to extremes before we're able to find balance. And then we live in an illusion of separation, and what is true at a given time is not true at a different time, because it has social and political connotations. So when we are at one extreme of the spectrum, what is true may be one thing, and then as we go to the opposite end of the spectrum, what is true is different. And when we find balance, what is true will be different again. So true is a relative concept, all the time changing. So how we conform to truth, if justice is how we conform to truth, then justice is also a relative concept and an ever-changing concept. And that's...
Yeah, this makes so much sense to me, you know, just as you're describing that,
Yes.
that sense. And I guess we also see how justice has unfolded over the years in our understanding of it and how it gets applied in the more obvious sense of the law, the kind of legal framework within which
That's
we
right.
function. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, I interrupted, but I just wanted to really acknowledge that description you've given us.
Absolutely. So because this is what happens on the human plane, that the truth will be relative, and therefore justice is relative, and we cannot have a concept of justice as something that is absolute. But then when we move to the laws and principles, then this changes. Because the laws and principles come from the realm of the soul. And in the realm of the soul is not ruled by polarity. Principles are defined in the wisdom teachings as that which embodies some aspect of the truth on which the system in which we live is based. Therefore, a principle is a spiritual reality. This is very important. In the wisdom teachings and in psychosynthesis, we're operating under the assumption that the soul is an ontological reality. That is, that it exists objectively, that it is a true being. It's not changing, it's not relative, it's not subjected to time and space. So when we think of justice in the realm of the soul, then we have something completely different. We're no longer dealing with relativity or with polarity. And this is where the principles and the laws come in, just to also help your listeners with these. We have three principles in which the system in which we live is based. The principle of essential divinity, which is that the spark of divinity is in every living thing. The principle of unanimity, which is that we're all one because we all partake of that spark of divinity. And the principle of goodwill, which is the truth that promotes harmony and unity because we are one and we're driven by the love and the will that we want to feel one. And then the laws reveal these principles. The laws help us live by the principles. So we are created with an inner impelling force within that makes us want to feel the spark of divinity. And we're also created with an inner unanimous orientation that help us move towards group endeavor. And then, because we're linked, we are inside us created with enough drive to seek intelligent cooperation that will lead us to right human relations. So we call these the principles and the laws for the new era. And when I was thinking of this, I thought that justice will be the supreme principle. It will be the principle that will embrace all principles and all laws. If we live by these principles and these laws, then we'll have justice, and then we'll be conforming to the truth. Then we'll have the real experience for that definition, because these principles are the truth of how our system is created. On the human plane, as we saw, we have a very different perception and a different manifestation of justice. But when we live by the laws and principles, the outcome will be justice, because we'll be living by the truth.
This seems so profound and so important and key. And what I'm minded about, what comes to mind is this idea that I think in our everyday world, in our kind of what we might consider our normal daily lives, when we relate to that word justice, we're often, like so many of these big, profound concepts, we're drawn into a much more simplistic expression of it, in that it we see it as a justice system, as a legal system, as perhaps a form of protection, as a form of holding people, including ourselves, to account. Whether you're someone who fears the law or tries to work around the laws of the land, or whatever. It becomes a framework to guide us. But we have a very particular view. But what you've described there has a much more essential quality to it, in the sense that it's not just abstract, but it is a felt sense. Was what I picked up from some of what you were describing.
And you're right. It is essential. It is essential in the way that it describes the essence of who we are. But the system that we have now, we need to remember that everything about us, the potential that we have as human beings, is first expressed in a way that is distorted, or that is minimal, if you will, rather than wide and as profound as these things that we're saying. And so what we have now is but a distortion and an attempt to have this real justice when we live by the laws and principles. And I think we're driven, if you think about the impartiality that we say that a judge must have, the higher manifestation of that is disidentification, for example. Disidentification is a concept that points to the ability of a human being to let go of the distortions of the personality and identify with the principles of the soul. And so in a way, this is what in the lower realm of humanity, a judge is trying to do, to be impartial. In a way, we're practicing disidentification, but it's a very small way and a distorted way. And it is distorted because the human-made laws are relative and maybe are also attached to the distortions of our personalities as societies. So it's only an attempt, as humans, we are trying to live spiritually, but we make attempts that are very distorted. The important thing is to continue in the progress, to continue disidentifying from distortions and being able to identify with the principles of the soul.
So I want to take you a little bit further into that idea of our humanity, and I'm going to bring forward something that has been expressed in a number of ways by Plato, by Aristotle, and that's the concept of the good, the beautiful, and the true. And these three major expressions of qualities of beingness, of identification, of soul. There are many levels at which we can see that, but these were expressed as being both categories of knowledge, but also ideal forms. But yes, what these teachers really pointed to was that the good, the beautiful, and the true is in every human being. Now, we may not always identify with that clearly in others or in ourselves, but if we continue down this road of what could we do as members of humanity, what's your sense of how we could do more to be able to visibly see both the laws and principles and these essential qualities of goodness, beauty, and truth in the expression of justice as we operate it in humanity? As you say, we're a work in progress, but what more could we be doing, do you think?
Well, I think the first thing to take into account is when we say that these things are in each human being, we need to remember that they are as potential. This is the key for me. They are as potential. Plato's philosophy is the philosophy of the ideal, which is the philosophy of our potential. And these transcendent properties of being are in all of us, indeed, also as ontological realities, meaning that they're true objective realities within us. I like the way you quote Plato, but I also like the way in which Thomas Aquinas speaks of them, because he says that these transcendental attributes are perfections which all things share, just by virtue of their being. This is, let's hear this again. Just by virtue of being, we have these perfections. And so what I want to add to that is that this perfection is our potential. The good, the beautiful, and the true is when we are true to ourselves, when we are aligned with the essence of the soul, and we manifest here the qualities of that soul, then we're good, beautiful, and true. What to do to be able to do this? My sense, you know how we speak so many times of doing spiritual work. My sense is that we don't need to do any spiritual work. We need to do personality work, because spirit is trying to manifest through us, whether we know it or not, whether we help it or not, whether we go against it or we go forward. Spirit is trying to manifest. What we need to do is to clear the ground, to work on our personality so that we have more space to receive the energy of spirit that is trying to manifest through us. And for me, the first step would be to become aware and to accept our polarities. To really become aware and to accept that we work through polarities. Because if we don't become aware, we identify with them and we believe this is what life is like, or we believe this is our mind, how our minds operate. And it's not. It's just the law that rules when we are incarnated. But if we become aware of that and accept it, then we can begin to disidentify. And when we disidentify, then there will be more space for soul energy to come through. And then we will live what is good, what is beautiful, and what is true. I'm aware of what I'm saying is lifetime work. I'm not saying that we're going to achieve this by tomorrow. But I know for my own experience that the more work I do on my personality, the more I disidentify from polarities and from opposites, the more space I feel for the qualities of my soul. And then it's when I have a little bit of what is good, beautiful, and true. And of course, you know, it's a work in progress, as you said before.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, absolutely. And you know, this is something we can be really harsh on ourselves about, isn't it? That we probably want life to be substantially different or better than it is today, not just for ourselves, but for others and, you know, for the whole world. Hopefully, if we've got a mind towards will to good and a heart towards will to good. I wanted to come back within that context to one of the laws that you mentioned around right relationships or right relationship, and just perhaps use that as a bridging point to think about what could be different in the new era. So as we know, we're taking steps, hopefully day by day, towards something that does allow us to live in our fullness of goodness, beauty, and truth. But if we think about right relationships, human to human, person to person, humans with other kingdoms, and we think about how fairness and impartiality and just action and just thinking, how all of these things, which are attributes of justice, how they could look, feel different in the new era. Can you help us paint a picture a little bit more, that's a little bit more concrete, something that feels like, you know, how do those right relationships really play out? What do we really mean by that? What does this new era start to look and feel like?
Before I comment on that, I wanted to go back to something you said, that we can be very harsh on ourselves or on others. And I'd like to say that if we truly accept that we are a work in progress, but if we truly accept it, then that harshness disappears. And I say, if we truly accept it, if it's not just a line, because when we really accept and have a felt sense that I'm a work in progress, then I'm able to forgive myself for my shortcomings, forgive others for their shortcomings, understanding that they are in progress, that I am in progress.
Well, let's just stay with that point for a second, and we'll come back to the other question, because what gets triggered as you say that, you know, my mind on behalf of some of our listeners here is going to the, okay, so what happens when we think about how justice is enacted in our world today, and you think about the judicial system, the legal system, and we utilize it to create those lines of separation between right and wrong, and we have someone who's, you know, crossed the line, behaved in a way that is unacceptable to the collective rules of society. And of course that immediately takes us into things around the way in which we apply ourselves to the rules of justice, if you will, and the role of judges, who you mentioned earlier, and of course those where we have you know, trials or whatever that include a jury. But there's something about forgiveness, compassion, understanding, acceptance. How do we hold all of that alongside this absolute of rights and wrongs? Do you know?
I know, this is a great question. This is a great question. I'm not going to pretend I have the answer, but it's a great question. And perhaps this is making me think, as a society, we're not holding this reality that we are work in progress. If someone makes a mistake which goes against the law, that person is judged, persecuted, imprisoned, rather than being seen as someone who has this shortcoming, but maybe on his or her way to searching for synthesis. So I work as a psychotherapist, and I have clients who have a mental health diagnosis that are bipolar or schizophrenic or whatever. But I see them all as individuals who are playing through the opposites. They're ruled by the law of polarity, and like me, they're seeking synthesis. Perhaps they're seeking balance. They're seeking the medium point between those two opposites, because that's what we're all doing. But society, not holding that view, punishes us for our mistakes, but the mistakes that go against human-made laws, you know, to begin with. And these laws are relative. Sometimes they're not just. You know, we as women know that many laws in the past were unjust to half of humanity and to Black people, you know, as well. And to, you know, there would be so many other examples. But if we, as individuals, as groups, begin to hold the idea, the true idea that we are work in progress, then we will bring about the new era. And with this, I got to the question that you were asking me before. This thing about the new era and the part that we will play. There is one thing I like saying all the time, and I think in my immediate circle, I may sound like a broken record, but I need to say it all the time, which is that the new era is not a structure that is going to come upon us and we're just going to happily walk into it. The new era is something that we create here and now with the small changes that we bring about in our individual being, in our families, in our groups, in our service, we, with the alchemy that we experience within and the alchemy that we encourage in groups, with clients, with friends, we are bringing about the new era here and now. And so we need to see what role do we play now so that the new era comes about. And I believe if this society cannot see that we're all work in progress and will punish us for our mistakes, I, as an individual, can put this philosophy in the field that we are work in progress. And that is how human mentality will be changed. So we need to truly live this and accept that. And this is already hard work because we're all ideological children of our societies. And you will see it in your clients, and I see it in my clients, that they punish themselves rather than accept themselves as work in progress. But the moment we do this, then we're bringing the new era in, and then perhaps justice will be possible when we forgive, when we embrace, when we understand that we are in the law of the opposites, but we're seeking synthesis, and then we'll be in right relationship and with goodwill. So let's do it now. You and I do it, our listeners do it with their families, with their clients, and this is how we bring this reality in. Let us all embrace that we are work in progress.
Fabulous, thank you. There's so much more we could say, but I need to bring us into our final question here, and it's something we ask all of our guests to offer at the end of the discussion, and that's a seed thought or an idea or a synthesis that will help our listeners in their everyday lives as we continue to reflect more deeply on this theme of justice. So I wonder, Mayte, whether you have something for us that would just draw our focus in a little bit and perhaps be useful for us in our daily reflections.
Yes, thank you, Lorraine, for the opportunity to do that. And for the listeners who are not so familiar with the laws and principles, of course, I would encourage them to know more through the Community of Living Ethics or Sundial House or Meditation Mount and all these organizations that work on the education and the and outreach about these laws and principles. And based on that and what we talked about and what I thought about when you first invited me, this is the seed thought that I'd like to offer. First is a formal seed thought, and then more like an informal mantra. So here they come. The seed thought. Justice is the supreme synthesis, a state of consciousness in which all spiritual principles and laws are revealed, embraced, manifested. I am just because I live by these laws and principles. And here's the mantra. My life is an expression of essential divinity. I know myself to be one with all my sisters and brothers. I sense the love and will that unites us. I open my heart to the inner impelling force that calls me to the divine. I open my mind to let myself be driven by the unanimous orientation that links us all. I open my whole being to intelligent cooperation. As I do these things, I bring justice to the world because I live by the truth. As I do these things, I am the new era, here and now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mayte. And I can absolutely imagine both of those resources being used time and time again as we reflect individually and collectively on the new justice that we can be living as we work more in synthesis with the laws and principles, the spiritual laws and principles.
Yes.
So thank you for a very rich sharing today and for being our guest on this podcast series. And we look forward to inviting you back soon on another topic.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best with this great service that you're doing through the podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayte. This podcast was offered by the Community of Living Ethics, Umbria, Italy, and freely inspired by Aldebaran, the community's Astrosophy group, and by our research on service.